Think.
All right. Well, good morning. And I am so delighted to be back in this space, which is truly a mosaic of beauty, love, justice, and peace. And today I'm going to talk about growing beloved community, cultivating empathy, cultural humility, and justice. And I open with this beautiful artwork by Claudia McKinney. And the piece is actually titled Love Wins. So if you look at it, you have all different races, ethnicities, hands coming together, working together. There's kind of the idea of a heart shape there. But in addition, you will see sun that is so nourishing, the sun thinking about light and hope, which was spoken about earlier today at the open of our service. And, I am reminded so much, one of my dear mentors, who's a guiding light still in my life, even though he has passed, his legacy continues, is Congressman John Lewis. And he would always speak about hope. He would remind us so often to be hopeful, to be optimistic, and to never lose our sense of hope. And I think that's really important, especially as we think about our world today and all of the heaviness. There is a lot of wrong, a lot of heartache, and often it is easy to just feel overwhelmed and even move into apathy or just shut down. And yet, what we know is we are also at a time where we need folks to engage and come together and organize and do the work of love and justice to really manifest a better world. And empathy, cultural humility play a vital role in that and can help us to not only cultivate beloved community and communities, but can also help us to advance justice. So I start here, as a framing, a slide with a basic visual from Tony Roth. And again, visuals are not perfect in any sort of way, but they can certainly help us to unpack and to start to think about things on a deeper level. And so I really love this visual because it reminds us of the differences, but also the interconnections between inequality, equality, equity, and justice. For a very long time in our world, in our society, and still today in many spaces, there's this kind of focus and talk about equality. But what we know is we cannot have equality without having equity. And there are a lot of reasons for that, including historical reasons, including the very fact that all of us as human beings, we start life in different places and spaces with different types of resources and needs. And so here you'll see equality giving people the same thing. In this case, both have the same ladder, still does not help the person on the right in terms of accessing fruit or food. Equity starts to address this by saying, you know what? Sometimes we have to give different things. It may appear to be unequal, but in fact, within doing that, we're starting to move equity to get closer to equality. And so we're giving different ladders here so both can access the food. Really, really important in the work that all of us are engaged in and doing. But again, we have to go deeper, right? So equity is very important, but our overarching goal, our North Star, needs to be justice. And justice calls on us to go into the roots, to ask some of the deeper questions, the heavy questions, to do heavy lifting and work. So in the image here with justice, we're actually going so far to start to really correct the systems that are creating these inequalities and inequities. And by going into those roots, making sure that everybody can have access to apples or food. And we can replace those apples with any of our human rights, right? Housing, clean water, thinking about even access to high quality education, all of the human rights that all of us deserve. So culture is a really important part of being a human being. Every single one of us, we have culture and cultures, And culture is this really kind of global, broad concept with a lot of different meanings packed in. It can refer to our values, our beliefs, our perceptions, relationships, attitudes, practices, rituals, routines, our rules, ways that we kind of go through our interactions on a daily level. Culture can vary from person to person or even community to community. It can be passed down from one generation to the next. And when we talk about culture, it is important to remember in its expansive form, it is more than just race and ethnicity. There are many, many aspects of culture. And culture is also often learned, right? We are taught culture and we're teaching culture as well as we engage in our spaces as a community. Here, I also have some beautiful artwork by Cindy Bernier, and it is called Parts of Whole. And it is an abstract piece, but if you stare at it long enough, you start to see certain things. Like in the center, if you look, there's a white kind of abstract shape that can appear as a dove, right? A dove of peace, flying and soaring. So you start to kind of pull back and you can even start to see some human shapes and forms to start to visualize all of it coming together, even though it looks very chaotic, together, kind of working in this unison, right? In a beautiful, tangled way. So for a very long time, even when you look at educational curriculums, we've done a lot of talking about compassion, and compassion is vital and necessary, but it also has to be paired alongside empathy. And often, traditionally, we've talked about empathy as putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And, it's important that we try, but here's the reality. Sometimes we can't always put ourselves in someone else's shoes because it's a reality we've never lived or experienced. And so, one of the things I want to call for is radical empathy. And radical empathy can be described in many ways. One of the pieces of radical empathy acknowledges that sometimes we cannot put ourselves completely in someone else's lived experiences or shoes. But what we can do is we can listen. We can seek to understand, seek to affirm someone's lived experience and their living, right, through those experiences. So here I actually bring words from Isabel Wilkerson, a brilliant Black scholar, thinker, educator. She wrote the book Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent. Really, really great book. If you're interested in history, she really starts to talk about the caste system we have in the United States. Often the word caste has been used in other countries when you think about India or you think about even Germany, right, with Nazis and what happened. We talk about caste systems. But in the US, it's not often used. And Isabel Wilkerson starts to describe even the foundations of our very nation as a caste system that we all need to be cognizant of and work to dismantle, right? To rebuild a healthier system and house that allows all of us to survive and thrive and to be together in beloved community. And so I like her definition here of radical empathy. And I actually have highlighted two particular parts to help us really focus in. Radical empathy, on the other hand, means putting in the work to educate oneself and to listen with a humble heart, to understand another's experience from their perspective, not as we imagine we would feel. Radical empathy is not about you and what you think you would do in a situation you have never been in and perhaps never will. It is rather about kindred connection from a place of deep knowing that opens your spirit to the pain of another as they perceive it. And I would actually extend on this by saying, it's not just spirit to the pain, but also spirit to joy, spirit to all of the human experiences, sharing that. One of the things I love about Unitarian Universalism, and here, even as we saw today in the beginning of Mosaic, is this open space to share. Everybody shares stories, what's going on in life, and folks listen and support each other. And that is a priceless gift, a gift that actually our world needs so much more of. And so here, I really focus us in to remember that empathy is work. We have to put in work. Just like if we want to get good at basketball, we have to practice drills and skills to get, our moves going. And even if you are the best basketball player on the court, if you take a year off and you come back, you're going to be rusty. Your skills are not going to be the same. And so part of this calls on us to be consistent in working what I like to call, and what I often tell my students, is an empathy muscle, right? We all have this muscle. So we want to pump and build and work on it. And it takes intentional work, mindful work, even heart work. And kindred connection, we also have to put in work to build spaces for kindred connection. We're living in a time in our world where, in many ways, it's interesting. We have all of these technology gadgets, and our world is moving at incredibly fast speeds. And there are beautiful pros to different evolutions of things, including technology. When you think about medical advancements, for instance, or you think about how we can connect from all over the world now, thanks to technology. But there are also things we need to be mindful of, right? The fact that as humans, we need human connection. We need spaces where we're able to connect and listen to each other's stories and be present with one another. Again, something I love. Even, listening to each other's joys and concerns and giving that moment to lift that, as you all do every service, that is beautiful. I thank you for that. These are the kinds of moments and spaces that help us to build radical empathy, to engage our empathy muscles. And we need to also encourage that in various spaces that we are in. Because one thing we know is when we see rampant human and civil rights violations, as we are seeing across our world today, and even when you want to magnify into the United States and the state of Florida, there is a lot of pain and struggle. There is a lot of threats against democracy, against justice, against love. You just have to look at all of the hateful legislation even being pushed and passed, even within our state. And yet, what we have to do is find ways to center back our humanity, because often our shared humanity is lost, forgotten, or attacked or erased in spaces where human and civil rights violations happen. And so radical empathy can play a part in that. The other thing I want to share today is a wonderful concept that really should be embodied and practiced in all of our community spaces, because there are so many benefits. And this is called cultural humility. And I want to give you a little background. So for a very long time, if any of us here are part of education or social work or even psychology, all of these different fields, medical field, even public health, we often started to move to a place to focus on something called cultural competence. So even in the 80s and 90s, this is very, very common. If you look across medical schools, this effort, understanding that we have to start to affirm diversity, but often it was being taught through performas or metrics that were labeled as cultural competence. So you would learn these things and then become competent, right, in various cultures. Well, what we know is that doesn't work because culture in itself is so diverse. You can't go out and say, all Asian people need this or like this. Think about how diverse even the continent of Asia is. And even within our subgroups and populations, there are so many diverse practices, traditions, languages, cultures. And this is true for all races and ethnicities, and even in our expansive identity wheel, when we think about ages, faiths, or religions. when you start to think about even gender, sexuality, there is so much expansiveness there. And so Dr. Melanie Turvalon and Dr. Jan Murray Garcia, two women who were doctors who were practicing in the 90s, really started to grapple with some big questions within the medical field, including disparities like higher maternal deaths for Black mothers, very, very much higher, right, across the United States. And so they were thinking about these kind of big disparities within the medical field, but then also started to think about how are we teaching within our practices as we prepare doctors to work with diverse people and communities. And so from this, they actually coined what is known as cultural humility. And this, again, is a different framework that kind of replaces and asks to kind of remove, in a sense, this idea of cultural competence. So cultural humility has many key attributes. One of them is openness, being open, doing a lot of reflection, self-reflection and awareness, lifelong learning. So one of the things about cultural competence is almost as if a checklist, once you got through these things, you were done, right? You were said to be competent, but that does not work, right? We have to be lifelong learners. And even when we're working with different communities, different people, we have to be willing to be open and to reflect, especially to mitigate biases, right? Our bias that all of us have implicit bias, right? Even the best of us. And it takes us having reflective moments to try to mitigate and to try to fight back against that. And to organize, of course, against explicit bias as well. So, along with lifelong learning, institutional accountability. This is really important. So, Dr. Turvalon and Marie Garcia, they said, part of this work with cultural humility is as we're learning, if we discover or something that is inequitable is revealed in our work, it's not enough to just identify or acknowledge. We actually have to do something about it, right? Our institutions need to be accountable and held accountable. Empathy and compassion. This is at the core and almost the heartbeat of cultural humility. And here, where they say to be other-oriented, one of the differences is in cultural competence. Still, that framework often centered around that individual. The world was being seen through their lenses, right, who were creating the systems, as opposed to stepping back and saying, who are the people we are working to support? Who are the people we are working to care for? And let's learn about their needs. Let's learn about their practices, their beliefs, their cultures, so we can truly partner and integrate into our systems, as opposed to having a hierarchy that often is very one-sided. And then acknowledging those power imbalances and balancing the power imbalances, right? And so these are all parts of the tenets of cultural humility. I wanted to show you these beautiful women. That is Melanie Turvalon, and that is Jan Murray Garcia. And they're just lovely women who also have stories of their own, have kind of really interesting identities. Melanie Turvalon being mixed, but identifies as Black. Jan Marie Garcia as a Black woman. But again, all of the nuances around all of the identities that they carry, they brought and crafted into this work. I always love to honor, so many times I think there are so many women specifically who are often erased out of history, erased out of all of these pieces of work across fields and disciplines, just like people of color. And we want to do our best to lift and to make sure that we are illuminating diverse voices in our spaces. So Dr. Melanie Turvalon says the ultimate goal of cultural humility is a sense of equity, equality, and respect that drives us forward. And I like here the words of Joe Gallagher, who reminds us to be culturally humble means that we are willing to learn. We are willing to learn. And I want to stop and just, I'm giving all of you an applause because I think community is a reflection of lifelong learning, right? On Sundays, you are carving out time to learn, explore different topics. That is amazing. That is beautiful. And again, it is part of cultural humility that we are always seeking to learn and expand and ask questions and to grow. And so here again, these main pieces of cultural humility I've listed here: lifelong reflective learning, respectful partnerships that recognize the power imbalances, and institutional accountability. And I'm not going to go too complex because of time into this, but I do want to point out that there are intrapersonal and interpersonal pieces. This is the tripartite model of cultural humility. And the main thing here, I would say, you can see what we have to do on an intrapersonal level and on an interpersonal level, but in the centering of this Venn diagram, you can see the words openness and accountability, right? Those tie these kind of realms together. And this comes out of the research of Janes in 2021, a researcher. And here is one framework for us to think about. Dr. Bennett kind of talks about the experience of difference. And I've actually kind of adapted this framework in my own work. And I'll share a little bit here. So what we know is, even when we're thinking about human differences and diversity, all the way on one side of the spectrum, we can think about something called ethnocentrism. And that is the denial, very, very dangerous and has horrific implications when you think about things like genocide, right? All the way to something as large, all the way to even discrimination in kind of a workplace, for instance. But ethnocentrism is the denial of others who are different than yourself. If you're kind of questioned, right, about this, if you're still on that side of the realm here, you might get very defensive. You might even work to minimize the voice of somebody who's speaking up and speaking out, as opposed to trying to listen and to learn. And as you keep moving on, you start to find acceptance, you start to find adaptation, integration, where we are able to listen to somebody different than us. We're able to learn from their stories. We're still able to honor our own stories and traditions and culture, but we're also able to integrate, right? And learn to work together in harmony. And ethno-relativism kind of moves into that. Now, I add on to this framework after integration to say cultural humility here can be this kind of North Star. If we can move from denial of somebody else's existence into cultural humility, where we are eager to learn about people, we're not scared about different cultures, but in fact, want to find, as Maya Angelou says, the beauty and the strength of diversity. That can create so many benefits that ripple throughout our world as we think about justice, beloved community, peace. And so cultural humility is a lifelong and dynamic process. And again, it is something that, is a framework that can be helpful as we are moving through and navigating the maze of life, the journey that all of us are walking on. And so, in my work, I talk a lot about institutional and systems level changes and remind folks that, we have to understand and embrace those interconnections between intrapersonal and interpersonal. The main thing here I would share is, in order to be culturally humble, to practice cultural humility, to advance equity and justice, to affirm diversity and cultivate inclusion, it necessitates ongoing individual and collective work, right? The individual work is a lot of reflection, a lot of unpacking, a lot of intentional commitment to keep growing as humans. And then the collective work is making sure that collectively we are organizing. We are working to change our communities, our nation, our world to be a healthier place. And right now, we are living in quite terrifying times. I know folks may have different political beliefs, but I will just share with you, with incoming administration coming in, it is terrifying because there is already talk about slashes to vital programs and pieces. Like you think about SNAPs, supplemental nutrition program that helps so many families. You think about cuts to McKinney-Vento, which is programs that are essential to help children and youth in our public schools, with resources that are so needed. You think about slashing things like the arts. The arts are one of the ways that bring us together, that cultivate empathy, both individually for people, but also collectively. Attacks on nature, taking natural parks and spaces that need to be preserved and bulldozing over that. There are real consequences, environmental consequences. Even thinking about climate change and what's going to happen when environmental protections that already are insufficient are now going to be erased. That is terrifying. And regardless of what we believe, where we are all humans on a planet that have to learn to coexist, and biodiversity is vital to the very thriving of our world. And so, cultural humility calls on us to not only learn, to seek to understand, it also calls on us to act, right? To take action. And here are two different, strategies, if you will, that you may want to explore or try if you're interested in learning more about cultural humility. The first one we call the 5 R's, and that is reflection, respect, regard, relevance, and resiliency. And what we want to do here is we want to focus on unifying our thinking and our feeling with cultural humility, but also our doing. And so what we often find, it's really interesting, even when you take something like the environment. We've been doing these kind of surveys now. I'm part of the National Justice Environmental Institute. And so, nationally, we're doing focus groups and interviews. And even where we find people do realize, oh my goodness, right? Our planet is hurting. So they have the thinking part. Sometimes there's not a deep connection in terms of really feeling that or doing something about that. Right? So there's these disconnects, and all of us can kind of run into this in different times in our own lives, right? Or sometimes maybe we're doing, right? I'm going to give you an example. There's an organization that recently, I was helping to just kind of do some education because they were doing work that was vital, such as providing essential resources like hygiene items, right? Food for people who are experiencing homelessness. But often when people were coming to get that, there was interactions that were not really healthy or that were loving. They were very transactional. And when people are hurting and they come to get food or resources, it's not just about those physical items, right? Often they need more. They need love, right? They need care. They want to be treated with dignity. And so, how do we then start to understand? Here's an example of somebody doing, they have good intention and they're trying to do, but they're really missing the feeling part, the empathy, right? Whether that's because of compassion fatigue, whether that's because of maybe not really being able to relate or understand, right? So, how do we link all of these? That becomes really key as we do our work as justice warriors in our world. And then here's another model called the Cultural Humility Humble Model. And humble is an acronym. The H stands for humble about the assumptions we make. U understanding our own background and culture. So we have to understand our own. This takes a lot of work. I'm going to tell you, I really try to help even students in my justice classes start to unpack and go into their own lives and journeys to think about what were the things that shaped their beliefs, their lenses. Where did their ideas and perceptions of the world come from? And we all want to take time to think about our background and our culture, think about things that are beautiful we want to celebrate, but also think about maybe gaps or things that may not be as healthy that we could work to grow. Motivating ourselves to learn more about another person's background, being present, listening to each other. That's huge. Beginning to incorporate the knowledge into our work, lifelong learning, and then emphasizing respect and I would say partnership. So here we talk about kind of service plans. That's if we had a system of care helping somebody who has specific needs in a community. But we can all do this, right? Be respectful, treat each other with dignity and love. Remember our shared humanity. I want to play this song for all of you. Playing for Change is an organization I've been part of for a very long time, and I do a lot of work with. And I love it. It unites people all over the world around music. And one of the beautiful pieces is you'll see people from all over the world playing during real time, but then those videos are synchronized to create what we're seeing. And the idea is we are all human. We are all connected no matter where we are. And so just enjoy.
I wanna see the world united and learn to live as one. I wanna see the world united, learn to live as one. I wanna see the world united, learn to live as one. I wanna see the world united, learn to live as one. Salam, yando, singeli na bato, bakufela kitupa. Sungisa, yando, na mituna ya bato, bakufela nanzala. Salam, yando, koki na bato, bakufela kitumba. Sungisa, yando, singeli na bato, bakufela nanzala. We have to bring the world together and learn to live as one. We have to bring the world together, learn to live as one. De lo que cuenta, vive sonriendo hasta el final. Pero días de alegría que nadie puede entender.
Just more like it, enough to ever find. שיר הזה הוא של כולנו, נשיר אותו בקול אחד.
We have to give us one. We have to bring the world together. It shall all
All right. I want to end the song there and just share, if you listen to those lyrics, we have to bring the world together. We shall overcome. We have to bring the world together. We have to learn to live as one. And I think that is such a beautiful message. And I think cultural humility can help us to advance and to manifest and to build beloved community and justice and to remember our shared humanity. Thank you all for everything you do and for having me this morning. It's always a joy, and I'm just sending all of you so much love through the screen.
Thank you, Rajni. We send you the same right back. Oh my goodness. Now, I